Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's Friday and the blockbuster is Predator. Not the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie franchisee, but the American drone that India is set to buy. It's been used in some Hollywood-style operations, though. We'll tell you which ones and why India needs the drone. Also, how does it compare to what India's adversaries have? Speaking of which, college graduates in China are throwing their degrees in the dustbin. We'll tell you why. Japan has redefined rape. It's a welcome but late move. The US is talking to Iran, but not directly and not for a formal deal. Cyclone Joy has struck. We'll tell you what it has left in its wake. And something called white people's lunch is trending. They're calling it the lunch of suffering. It's funny until it's not. We'll look at what's cooking. The headlines first. Biggest Russian missile attack on Kiev in weeks, says Ukraine. It claims to have downed several Russian missiles, including the hypersonic Kinzhals. The strikes come as African leaders visit the Ukrainian capital on a peace mission. The European Union tries to ease tensions between Serbia and Kosovo, calls for a meeting between them next week. Fresh clashes broke out last month. Serbia arrested police officers from Kosovo. Myanmar's junta-backed media calls the United Nations quote-unquote rotten. The UN had slammed Myanmar for curbs on aid for cyclone survivors. Earlier this week, the UN Special Envoy for the country also stepped down. The world experiences its warmest early June on record and there is no respite in sight. Experts warn of more extreme temperatures ahead. This is due to the El Niño phase, which could last for years. And the latest Spider-Man animation won't hit screens in the United Arab Emirates. This follows backlash over a scene featuring a flag with the warning, "Protect trans kids." Other Gulf states have also not listed the film. Prime Minister Narendra Modi begins his US visit next week. The White House is rolling out the red carpet. There will be a state dinner, an address to the US Congress, engagements with the diaspora, a lot of pomp and celebration. Now, as Prime Minister, he has visited the US almost every year. But this is his first state visit. And it's the beginning of a major shift. The US wants to bring India into its defense orbit. So Washington is opening its walls. It is offering India access to some of its prized possessions. We told you about the transfer of the jet engine technology last night. It's a very big deal. So is the drone deal. The Americans have been trying to sell these drones to India for a while now. It's finally happening. India is buying 30 elite armed drones. The deal is worth $3 billion and it may change the complexion of the India-US relationship. Tonight we'll tell you how. First, let's talk about the drones being bought. A lot of fancy names are doing the rounds. Reaper, Predator, Sea Guardian. What exactly is India buying? Well, broadly, three types of drones are on the table. The MQ-1, the MQ-9 and the MQ-9B. Now, the MQ-1 is also called the Predator. It can be used for surveillance and attacks. It has an updated version and that is called the MQ-9 Reaper. It's also called the Predator B. How is this different? Well, it can move faster and it can carry more munitions. Then you have the third type, the MQ-9B Sea Guardian. This is a surveillance drone used largely for surveillance and reconnaissance missions for maritime security. And it's not new to India. The Indian Navy operates 2 of these drones. They've got them on lease. They're used to watch the Indian Ocean region. So these 3 drones are on offer. Now, India can buy 1 or all of these, and the total number they've agreed on is 30. Where will India use these drones? In all 3 services, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. They have 5 broad operational requirements. Number 1 is border security, which is self-explanatory. You monitor the threats and you keep track of what's happening at the border. Number 2 is counter-terrorism operations. I'm talking about striking with stealth. Number 3, maritime security. India has a vast coastline and the drones can be put to good use there. Number 4, disaster management. And number 5 is strategic deterrence. These drones have been used in all such operations in the past, not by India, but other countries. Let me give you examples. In 2020, the Predator B was used for a critical mission, the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. It was a very big operation. President Donald Trump had given the orders, and the strike happened in Baghdad. Even before Soleimani got off his plane, his fate was sealed. This drone, the Predator B, was loitering in the air. As Soleimani deboarded, the drone captured him live. It followed Soleimani for 10 minutes. The general was traveling in a convoy with 2 cars. The camera on the drone captured him. That photograph was used to identify and confirm his presence, to determine which car he's in, where he's sitting, and what he's wearing. Soleimani, as it turned out, was in the first car. Once he was ID'd, it was time to attack. The Predator B was armed with a Hellfire missile. This missile can be fired from the air and it can be guided by lasers. So the Hellfire was fired, and that was the end of Qasem Soleimani. India too has such missiles. All it needs is the drone. It will give our forces the capability to strike an enemy without putting boots on the ground. The Predator is a fiercely capable machine. It can fly non-stop for 24 hours, an entire day, at the height of 50,000 feet. It's been tested in combat situations. Like in the 1990s, the Predator drone was deployed for NATO's airstrikes in Serbia. It has been used in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Americans, of course, operate this drone. The Brits have also bought it. In the war against the ISIS, the UK deployed the Predator B in more than 2,400 missions. That's almost 2 missions every day. Do you know which other countries have this drone? France, Italy, Spain, Japan, the Netherlands. And now India will join this Predator club. Where will New Delhi deploy it? We've already told you about the Indian Ocean. The drone was also used to watch China's activities along the Himalayan border, to keep an eye on the PLA, the Chinese army. It can be useful to carry out surgical strikes too, to deter cross-border infiltration and to secure exclusive economic zones and maritime interests. These drones have multiple capabilities, so they'll have a wide range of applications. And India needs them to counter its adversaries. Pakistan and China are arming themselves too. They have their own drone programs. China has something called the CH-5 Rainbow drone. And Pakistan gets drones from countries like China and Turkey. In fact, Pakistan is believed to have China's Skyhawk 4 and the Wing Loong UAV, also the Turkish Bayraktar drone. How do they compare to the Predator and the Sea Guardian? Well, most reports and experts say the American machines are superior, so India can claim a lead. But remember, these technologies are fast changing and there's a proliferation of drones across the world. Each country is trying to catch up. Until India comes up with domestic options, it's best to be equipped for the emerging threats. Drones are hard power. There's nothing subtle or graceful about lethal flying machines. But hard power can only get you so far. You also need soft power. Some countries organically develop it, others just buy it. And seems like sports is on everyone's shopping list. West Asia is leading the way. They're using petrodollars to buy sports clubs and leagues. Manchester United could be the latest. They're in talks with a Qatari businessman, Manchester United, and this businessman is the son of their former prime minister, so it's pretty much a government-backed deal. How much is Qatar offering? $6 billion to buy the whole club. But there's a rival bid on the table. It's come from British billionaire Jim Ratcliffe. Now, reports say the Qatari offer is better, so right now the club is considering granting exclusivity to Qatar. What does that mean? Exclusivity means the club can only negotiate with Qatar. The other buyers are out for that period. It's certainly a good sign for Qatar. They could soon own one of the most iconic clubs in football. It's massive, but it's not unprecedented. Gulf countries do own multiple clubs already. The UAE owns Manchester City. A Saudi group owns Newcastle United, and a Qatari businessman owns PSG. At least these are clubs. In the case of golf, Saudi Arabia has bought the entire sport, and I'm not even joking. Golf was run by a non-profit called PGA. They contracted players and they ran all the major events across the world. But last year, Saudi Arabia launched their own league. It's called Live Golf. One by one, they poached PGA players. They offered them hundreds of millions of dollars. At first, the PGA objected. They filed legal cases against players who joined Live Golf. But now, They've done a U-turn. Earlier this month, PGA and Live Golf decided to make peace. They're calling it a merger. But let's be real. This is a hostile takeover by Saudi Arabia. There are two obstacles, though. I mentioned that PGA was non-profit. As a result, they paid no taxes in the United States. But Congress wants to change that. American politicians want to strip PGA of its tax-exempt status, and that could affect Riyadh. Secondly, the US Department of Justice is probing this merger. They fear it could limit competition, perhaps violate antitrust laws. Either of these could derail the merger. Now, if you're sitting in India and thinking it's only golf, well, think again. Saudi Arabia is also coming after cricket. They're planning something like the IPL. Reports say the International Cricket Council, the ICC, will soon sanction it. Now, cricket leagues are not new. Australia has them. So do South Africa, England and Pakistan. But none of them come close to the IPL, and that's where Saudi Arabia is different. Their league could potentially cannibalize the IPL. How? By contracting Indian players. Now, we know the Indian board, the BCCI, does not allow Indian players to compete abroad. They play only in the IPL. Saudi Arabia wants to change that. They're looking to offer all-year contracts to Indian players, basically make cricket like football. Clubs will come first, countries second. Take any sport, and this is what's happening. Saudi Aramco is one of the biggest sponsors in Formula One. Some Gulf states are also shopping for NBA teams. It's an unprecedented sports takeover, one that covers every sport and every league, which also means there is a lot of criticism. You see, these clubs are part of a legacy. So the argument is toxic Gulf states are buying up that legacy. But the clubs will be tainted by the purchase, which is a fair argument. Sports washing is happening all around us. But let's not pretend all the previous owners were symbols of purity. There were enough shady characters going around. Meet Donald Sterling. He owned NBA team Los Angeles Clippers for 30 years. He's been accused of sexual harassment and racism. In fact, he used the N-word to describe his players. Sterling holds a unique record in the US. He was federally prosecuted for racism. Imagine that. Another example is Silvio Berlusconi, the former Italian Prime Minister who passed away this week. He owned football club AC Milan. His controversies have their own Wikipedia page. Sexual harassment, underage sex, financial irregularities, praising Mussolini. The list is pretty long. Then you have Russian oligarchs. They own clubs across Europe. Roman Abramovich owned Chelsea from 2003 to 2022. Others include AS Monaco, Sydney FC, and AFC Bournemouth. Nobody objected until Russia invaded Ukraine. So my point is this: sports washing is not new. Rich and problematic men have always dominated sports. Now there are rich, problematic, and Arab men. And I'm not saying that justifies it. I'm only saying that the outrage should have started decades ago. The politics of sports is all about one thing: money. Why did these club owners sell to Gulf states in the first place? Why did they not protect the legacy? Because money. We used to say that sports is a vehicle for change, for reform, for activism. But today it's a political pawn. If you have the money, the pawn is yours. Our next story begins with some interesting pictures. Look at these. These are Chinese students. They've just graduated. And what do students typically do on graduation day? Well, they celebrate, among other things, but not these Chinese students. Look closely at them. They appear unhappy. One of them is lying on the ground, another is throwing her degree in the dustbin. And there are many such photographs doing the rounds of dejected-looking students. You may ask why, and we'll tell you. Why are so many Chinese students unhappy? Because they face a difficult future. Unemployment in China is at a record high. The numbers came out yesterday. We told you about them. More than 20% of the youth in China is unemployed. That's close to 6 million workers. Now add these graduates to the list. Do you know how many students are graduating this year in China? More than 11 million. They're entering a gloomy job market. I'm sure some of them will find jobs, even good ones, but not all of them. There are 6 million unemployed workers already looking for a job in the very same market, so it won't be easy, and the students know this. They've started a trend. It's called lying flat. It's a lifestyle trend. It's adopted by young Chinese workers frustrated with the daily struggles of modern life. What does lying flat mean? Adopting a more passive lifestyle, not buying homes or cars, not getting married, not having children, and in some cases resorting to extreme measures like this one. This young man went to the London School of Economics. Now he's out on the streets of China offering political science consulting services to anyone who can pay. We cannot confirm when or where this picture was taken. It shows the graduate with a placard in Mandarin. And this is what it says: postgraduate from LSE providing political science consulting services, knowledgeable of Russia, Ukraine, modernization theory, populism, identity politics, the neoliberal dilemma. Taxi drivers, 10% discount. Other political science students, 10% extra charge. It's an interesting pitch, you have to say. He may or may not find takers, but he's made it to the news. But not everyone can hustle like this. So some have decided to stay in college. They're choosing to fail their exams. This is according to a survey conducted by a Chinese newspaper. Graduates were asked a simple question: do you know someone who has delayed their graduation by failing the exam? Do you know what the result was? Nearly 75% of the students replied with a yes. Some students refused to attend classes. Others turned off their phones on the day of the exam. And yet others deliberately flunked the exam. For what joy? To remain in college for one more year, because life after college can be scary and the prospect of a job is dim. Also, China is an extreme case. Its economy has stagnated due to poor policies, and new graduates are paying the price for this. But what about the rest of the world? How does the global job market look? Tough. Do you know how many new jobs will be created this year? Just 3 million. That's an increase of just 1% from 2022. Leading economies are reporting high rates of unemployment, like the Eurozone, France, Italy, Brazil, Turkey, Spain, South Africa. The unemployment rate in all of these places is above 6%. So the jobs crisis is a global story. India too is struggling. The unemployment rate is around 8%, and that's not even the most worrying number. 40% of Indians are below the age of 25. As of December 2022, almost half of them were unemployed. India's population recently surpassed China, so more jobs are an urgent need, not just for the sake of the future of the youth, but also for the social stability of the country. There's some good news in Japan. The country has strengthened its rape laws. In fact, it has redefined what constitutes rape. Now, if you're thinking, isn't that obvious? Well, not really. This was Japan's old definition of rape: forcible sexual intercourse. I underline the word force. Now look at the new definition: non-consensual sexual intercourse. The emphasis is now on consent, and this is part of a broader movement that is happening globally. Japan, in fact, is late to it. You see, force is not the only criterion for sexual assault. Even in the absence of force, rape can happen. If you're being blackmailed, if there is abuse of power, if you're incapacitated because of drugs or alcohol, in these cases, there may not be physical force, but there is also no consent. That's what Japan has now recognized. Their lawmakers have made 3 changes. One is the changed definition. The second is raising the age of consent. It was 13 before, now it is 16. And third, specifying situations where it's hard to form consent. 8 situations have been defined, like when you're drunk or when you're scared of consequences if you refuse. Now, why did Japan feel the need to do this now? For starters, because it's the right thing to do, but also because predators were getting away. In 2019, this happened a lot. The rape definition was so narrow that many accused were acquitted. That's when the calls for change began. But laws alone are not enough. They may not be enough to bring real change. Japanese society has trouble talking about things like rape and consent. It's off limits. In fact, here's what a study found in 2021. Only 6% of men and women survivors reported sexual assault. Half of the women were scared of embarrassment, and that tells you what the issue really is. You can't tackle a problem that you refuse to acknowledge. Thankfully, Japanese lawmakers have taken the first step. But elsewhere, even lawmakers are not safe. This is Lydia Trope. She's an independent senator in Australia. On Thursday, she broke down inside Parliament. She talked about being propositioned and inappropriately touched. Listen to this.
There are different understandings of what amounts to sexual assault. What I experienced was being followed, aggressively propositioned and inappropriately touched. I was afraid to walk out of the office door. I would open the door slightly and check the coast was clear before stepping out. It was to the degree that I had to be accompanied by someone whenever I walked inside this building.
That was a senator. She makes laws for her country. She's probably one of the most powerful women around, but even she experienced this. Lydia Trope did not name her harasser on Thursday. Australian Parliament laws forbid that. But the day before, she did name him. Liberal Senator David Van. Listen to this.
This person,
Senator Thorpe, I would just warn you at this point,
sexually assaulted me,
Senator Thorpe,
and the Prime Minister had to remove him from his office.
Senator
And to have him talking about this today is an absolute disgrace.
Now, he's denied the allegations, but his party has decided to exclude him from further meetings. I'm sure this happens elsewhere too. Maybe in Australia, the lawmakers are finally speaking up. In 2021, there was a public inquiry into sexual harassment inside Australia's parliament. The findings were astonishing. 1 in 3 people had been harassed. And remember, this is inside the parliament. 1 in 3 people. Lydia Trope's first sentence sums up the problem. I want you to listen to it again.
There are different understandings of what amounts to sexual assault.
It's true. Sexual harassment is not just about being physically forced. It can be comments. It can be gestures, which is why defining it is so important. Take marital rape, for example. There are people who think marriage is permanent consent, that their spouse is obliged to do what they want, which is totally wrong. But many countries do not recognize this. Marital rape is not an offense in 32 countries, including India. The Supreme Court is hearing the matter. It has made critical comments on the issue. So the hope is marital rape will soon be criminalized. But I come back to my earlier point. Laws alone are not enough. Societies need to evolve and understand. If not, survivors will never speak up. Their voices will be suppressed by fears of disapproval and embarrassment. Meanwhile, in South Asia, there's a major storm, Cyclone Joy. It made landfall yesterday. This was in Western India. Joy is a Bengali word. It means disaster or calamity. Thankfully, in this case, the damage was not as much as it could have been. Although 2 people have died and 23 are injured. This was in the Indian state of Gujarat. But like I said, it could have been much worse. The cyclone is still around, but it's in a reduced state. It's now being classified as a cyclonic storm, the lowest in the 5-category system. It will continue to cause heavy rains, but the wind speeds have reduced, and this has allowed cleanup work to begin. Here's a report.
Yesterday, India and Pakistan were on high alert. A cyclone approached the western Indian state of Gujarat, Cyclone Joy. It made landfall last evening, but its fury was mostly concentrated on trees and infrastructure. That's because authorities were prepared. India had evacuated over 100,000 vulnerable people from Gujarat's coastal regions. Pakistan moved about 82,000 people to safety. And it helped. In India, the loss of life was limited.
2 people died before the landfall, which is sad news. However, the preparations for the cyclone proved helpful as there were no casualties after the landfall. At least 24 animals have died and 23 people have sustained injuries. But there has not been any loss of lives after the landfall. The electricity supply has been disrupted in about 1,000 villages.
The 2 people who died were shepherds. They tried to protect their flock from the rough seas and torrential rains. Sadly, they died trying to save their animals. This was a while before Cyclone Joy made landfall. No deaths have been reported since. However, the cyclone has left a trail of destruction in its wake. Buildings have collapsed, trees have been uprooted, vast swathes of land are flooded, and about 4,600 villages in Gujarat are without electricity. That's due to the cyclone's winds knocking out power lines. The winds also caused a fire at a major port. It caused a stockpile of coal to ignite, sending embers and smoke over the Oka port. But the worst seems to be over, and cleanup operations have begun.
The number of tree falls in Mandvi have risen. Yesterday, only a few small structures collapsed, but judging by the wind speed, the damage might be worse today.
The cyclone hasn't dissipated yet. It's still around, but in a weakened state. Before making landfall, it was categorized as a very severe cyclonic storm. Now it's being labeled a cyclonic storm. The severity has subsided. The wind speeds have reduced, but it'll continue to bring moderate to heavy rains wherever it goes.
Moving northeastward, the cyclone will be centered toward South Rajasthan and North Gujarat on June 16 evening, and it will then weaken and turn into a depression.
And it seems the cyclone mostly affected India. Pakistan was mostly spared. Life there is returning to normal.
By the grace of God, the cyclone has passed and there are no more threats. So people have started fishing again and coming back to normal life. Also, people are coming back to their homes.
The last cyclone to hit this part of South Asia caused about 100 deaths. This was Cyclone Taukte in 2021. A cyclone in 1998 killed over 1,000 according to official figures. It seems this time authorities have learnt from the past and managed to restrict the human cost.
For our next story, let me begin with a folk tale about a hen that laid golden eggs. Maybe you've heard it before. Once upon a time, a farmer had a hen. It laid a golden egg every day. The farmer assumed that the hen must contain a lump of gold inside its body. So he killed the hen, but he found no gold. And this is what he was left with: no gold and no daily golden egg. That's the story. Now imagine a twist. The farmer has a dead hen and he starts ticketing people to come and see it, to see the dead hen. He starts charging people so they can witness the corpse of a bird that was once lucrative. I know it sounds grim and odd, but that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan, except here, instead of a golden hen, it's Buddhist statues. And instead of the farmer, it is the Taliban. The terrorist group that now rules Afghanistan, the Taliban. Let me show you what they're up to. These are the great Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan. They were priceless artifacts, thought to be the two biggest standing Buddhas on the planet. They awed travelers across the world for 15 centuries. Some 800 years ago, they survived the wrath of Genghis Khan. They managed to withstand his cannon fire, but what they could not manage to survive was the Taliban. Taliban founder Muhammad Omar declared the Buddhas false gods. He said these idols have been gods of the infidels. And this is what followed. The Taliban destroyed these statues in 2001, bit by bit, with hammers, with spades, with explosives, ignoring pleas from all over the world. And this cemented the Taliban's image on the world stage as uncompromising extremists. Now the Taliban are back in power and the Bamiyan Buddhas are gone. Only two gaping holes remain, where the statues once stood. And you know what the Taliban now say? The Buddhas should not have been bombed. The Taliban are calling them an important part of Afghanistan's cultural heritage. They're inviting tourists to Bamiyan and selling tickets to visit the bombed site. For Afghans, the price is 58 cents. For foreigners, it's $3.45. Quite the shift, right? The golden question is why, and the simple answer is the golden hen. I'll explain. Afghanistan is one of the least developed countries in the world. Its economy continues to deteriorate. It faces international sanctions. It is losing humanitarian aid. It needs money desperately. And it sees the remains in Bamiyan as a potential source of revenue. The golden hen, even dead, can be lucrative. But are people actually buying it? The Taliban government thinks so. Last year, it says some 200,000 registered tourists visited Bamiyan. They spent an average of $57 each, and Bamiyan is one of the poorest regions in the impoverished country. So this seems like a decent deal, but apparently it's not good enough. Because these Buddha cavities receive mainly two types of visitors. Some are Taliban soldiers themselves stationed nearby, others are educated urban Afghans, mostly still angry at the Taliban. What the regime wants is to draw cultural enthusiasts and archaeologists from abroad. Can they pull it off though? It's hard to say at this point. The Taliban may want to position themselves as the champions of culture and make some money off it. But drawing foreign tourists will be a challenge. Now some news from West Asia. Two sworn enemies are holding talks, secret ones. The United States and Iran. Reports say their officials met in Oman last month. They held indirect talks, meaning they were not face to face. Oman was ferrying the messages between both sides. But what was the discussion about? The Iran nuclear deal. Joe Biden promised to revive it after becoming president. He tried for close to 1 year, but he failed miserably. So now he's trying again. He's up for re-election next year. He's also under pressure from the Israelis. They are threatening to strike Iran unless the nuclear program is paused. So what does Joe Biden do? Try to secure an informal deal, sort of like a mini agreement. Now, the semantics are important here. A formal nuclear deal will have to be ratified by the US Congress. And right now that looks unlikely. American lawmakers do not want to make any concessions to Iran. They're also accusing Tehran of arming Russia. So Congress is no-go, which is why the White House is playing it safe. They're talking about, quote-unquote, an understanding or an informal deal, something that won't need Congress approval. Listen to this spokesperson of the State Department.
We continue to use diplomatic engagements to pursue all of these goals in full coordination with our allies and partners. But as I said yesterday, with respect to Iran's nuclear program, there is no deal. The reports that there are a deal or some agreement or some other description, however you want to describe it, are not true. Sorry to retread ground.
Pretty vehement, almost as if by design, but multiple reports suggest otherwise. They quote US and Iranian officials confirming that a deal is indeed in the works. Some in Tehran are calling it a political ceasefire. So what's in it for both sides? Well, the US is hoping that Iran will pause uranium enrichment. 90% is weapons-grade uranium. Iran is at 60%. The informal deal could keep it there at 60%. Iran may also release American citizens detained in the country, and Biden would love that before elections. Him at the tarmac receiving Americans released from Iran. Perfect campaign photo. The deal could also see Iran stopping its attacks on US contractors in Syria. And what do they get in return? The Iranians. Broadly speaking, they're asking for three things: sanctions relief to sell oil, unlocking of frozen assets, and stopping the seizure of their oil tankers. And some of this, by the way, is already happening. Last week, Iran paid $2.7 billion, Iraq paid $2.7 billion to Iran. Now, Baghdad owed this money for buying gas and electricity. The purchases are old, but the payment came only last week. Why is that? Because sanctions were preventing Iraq from paying Iran. Last week, the Americans waived some of it, so Baghdad could finally pay up. Similar payments were also held up in South Korea, or are held up in South Korea. Seoul owes about $7 billion to Iran, and that too is now on the table. But how close are we to securing this deal? Some Israeli officials called it imminent, but we've heard that before. In 2021, there was a lot of chatter about the nuclear deal. European officials kept saying it was only days away. In the end, nothing happened. This time, President Biden faces even more challenges. The chairman of the US Foreign Affairs Committee has written to him. He says any agreement must be submitted to the Congress, even informal ones. So chances are there could be a legal showdown. And Iran is wary of that. Because what's happening now is like a deja vu. In 2015, Iran placed their trust on the White House. They signed the nuclear deal. The next year, another president came to office and he walked out of the deal. Now there is another attempt, and just like 2015, this is an election year in America. And who is likely to challenge Joe Biden? The same president who walked out of the deal, Donald Trump. More than enough reason to be concerned. But for Biden, even an informal deal is big. He's losing most of his allies in West Asia. And Israel is among the few remaining. If they feel that the US is not doing enough, they could go rogue. maybe even strike Iran themselves. So Joe Biden needs to get this right, because who knows, maybe he won't have a chance after next year. To live is to suffer. This is a famous quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. Many would agree. Now, this suffering can take various forms. But for the Chinese, it often takes the avatar of what they call white people food. Seriously, that's what they have named Western packed lunches, white people food. Plain ingredients like raw vegetables, sliced meats and crackers. The Chinese are trying this food, then letting their innermost emotions run free by roasting the meals, not in the way you'd imagine. They say, this is the lunch of suffering, or this meal shows what it's like to be dead, and this trend is going viral. But is it simply to poke fun, or does it hold a deeper meaning? Our next report tells you.
This is a viral video of a woman on a train in Switzerland. She's eating a bag of lettuce with ham and a packet of mustard. For many, this isn't a big deal, but for the users on Chinese social media, this food is lawless and outrageous, or the lunch of suffering. They claim even a rabbit would kick away this food. This video garnered so much criticism online, it sparked a culinary trend. Now the Chinese, both at home and abroad, are trying white people food. Yes, that's what they're calling it. They're trying Western packed lunch, which is usually eaten in Europe, the US and Australia. Think veggies, crackers, cold cuts, boiled eggs, and the occasional piece of fruit. After what they call suffering this food, they're letting their inner Gordon Ramsay run wild by going online and expressing their critique on Chinese blogs, and doing so quite unabashedly. One user said he saw a woman buy raw sliced mushrooms, then eat it at the supermarket. He says he was dumbfounded. Another user shared their colleague's lunch. It was baby carrots and spinach, and went on to ask how anyone can be energetic after eating such food. But if you still lack clarity, one TikTok user clearly explained what white people food means. First, it has no spices. Why? The user says it's because the food doesn't prioritize enjoyment. Next, it involves minimal preparation. And lastly, it's eaten at work or school. So once people get back home, they can finally eat so-called normal food and get their life back. The user really didn't mince their words. But why are Chinese people poking fun at Western food? Experts say because they're fascinated. Chinese people are used to labor-intensive food, where cooking involves a lot of different ingredients, like a mix of vegetables, meat, and grains with a bunch of different spices. So while Chinese people are used to an explosion of flavor, eating only crackers, cheese, and ham can seem jarring. But this food roasting session is more than just an online trend. It's a representation of how many people in China are making a shift from elaborate to simple eating, even if they're doing so with grudging acceptance. Why? Because of China's grueling work culture, where most workers follow what's called the 996. It involves working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. It sounds crazy, but 996 is pervasive in the country. Reports say people regularly work more than 300 hours every month, far surpassing legal limits in China. And the result? Apart from the physical and emotional toll of overwork, people lack the time to prepare elaborate meals, or even go out to grab food. So they're trying, albeit with difficulty, to accept simple meals, but also finding humor in the misery. Some say that while this trend may have made them suffer, it also helped them save time, money, and a lot of calories. But many aren't convinced. One commentator said, if such a meal is to extend life, what is the meaning of life?
Speaking of challenges, the NATO is facing one, and I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about the drama over Sweden's application. They've been talking for months, but Sweden has still not been able to join the group. It has still not been able to convince the holdouts, Turkey and Hungary. The two nations are refusing to give Sweden the nod, and this is a challenge that must be overcome because to join the NATO, all members have to agree. So what will it take for Turkey and Hungary to relent? Well, the US is on the job now. It is using the old carrot and stick approach. For Turkey, the Americans are offering the F-16 carrot. For Hungary, they have a military stick. A US senator has blocked a $735 million arms sale to Hungary. Our next report has the details.
I, from the Swedish side, argue that we have done enough to justify ratification of the Swedish application. We haven't reached a conclusion in that area, and we have agreed to continue the talks ahead of Vilnius, and then we can see. And I don't speculate when that decision will be taken, and this is a Turkish decision and a Hungarian decision.
That was Oskar Stenström, Sweden's chief negotiator. What's he negotiating? Sweden's NATO membership. Stockholm had applied to join NATO last year, along with its neighbour Finland. And while Finland has already become a NATO member country, Sweden's accession is still uncertain. The biggest problem is Turkey. Newly re-elected President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has blocked Sweden's bid for months now. Erdogan has a bone to pick with Stockholm. It's over what he calls Kurdish terrorists. Groups of Kurds fighting for independence in Turkey had found refuge in Sweden, and Ankara wanted Stockholm to give them up, which it has. Sweden enacted a new anti-terror law recently. It targets these groups that have upset Erdogan. Stockholm is also extraditing Kurds to placate Turkey. But it seems that Erdogan has shifted the goalposts. He now says that Sweden must stop what he calls anti-Turkey protests conducted by the Kurdish groups. That's of course a blatant violation of the right to free speech. And besides, Sweden has complied with Turkey's previous demands. You can imagine that Stockholm is starting to get frustrated. But maybe there's another reason Erdogan continues to hold out. He's eyeing a tantalizing prize: F-16 fighter jets and modernization kits from the US. US-Turkey defense ties have been strained for a while now. Washington has given Ankara the cold shoulder ever since it bought defense equipment from Moscow. This was in 2019. So, Erdogan believes he can use Sweden's NATO bid as leverage to start buying American arms again. And US President Joe Biden seems to be playing ball. While speaking about Erdogan last month, Biden said, and I quote, "He still wants to work on something on the F-16s. I told him we wanted a deal with Sweden, so let's get that done." While this game of the Price is Right continues with Turkey, the US isn't playing games when it comes to Hungary. The Eastern European nation is also sitting on Sweden's bid, but for more personal reasons. Reports say Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is in a huff. He's annoyed that Sweden accused him of curbing media freedom, the rule of law and democracy. A host of other Western nations have criticized Orbán, but Sweden is the country that needs something from Hungary. It needs Orbán's nod to join NATO. And Orbán is flexing his veto power, perhaps in the hopes of a heartfelt apology. But it seems the US doesn't want to wait for Orbán's hurt feelings to heal. It's showing Hungary the stick. US Senator Jim Risch has blocked a $735 million arms sale to the country. He clearly stated it was over Hungary blocking Sweden's NATO bid. Hungary has hit back by saying it wasn't expecting the equipment anyway. But the move confirms that patience is running thin in Washington.
So we believe, and you've heard from this president multiple times, that we believe Sweden should become a NATO member as soon as possible. That is what the president has said. He has shown his support. That is what we've seen from Congress as well. And so, look, we're going to continue to stay steadfast.
The next NATO summit is on the 11th of July. Sweden wants to officially be welcomed during that summit. It's a race against the clock. Sweden's backers are employing every trick in the book to get its membership done by that deadline. Will they succeed? We'll keep you updated as this unfolds.
And before we wrap, here's something that I want to share with you. Next week is going to be special. We are going to bring you special episodes of Vantage from the US as we cover Prime Minister Modi's state visit to America. Don't miss that. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Some 2,500 South Korean and American troops took part in joint exercises marking the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the two nations. Swedish climate activists put red handprints on Claude Monet's painting. Tourists in an Australian park were filmed fighting off a feisty kangaroo. And finally, what makes the 16th of June significant? Taking you back in history to the year 1976. When the Soweto uprising took place in South Africa, police brutally attacked thousands of protesting school children, and this incident marked the beginning of the end of the apartheid system. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday from the US.
F-15K 전투기 편대가 MK-80는 원거리에서 통제하여 은밀하게 적을 타격 시 직접 충돌 및 공중 폭파 등 다양한
Situationen är akut. Pandemin var ingenting jämfört med klimatkollapsen. Det som kommer kan vi inte ens föreställa oss. Som sjuksköterska kommer jag kunna ge er någon trygghet. Vi kommer också drabbas av svält, vattenbrist, konflikter.
Helen! This is a lady!
Becoming a UK PM.
Well, it's not like that we are going to get the Kohinoor back. But at least India is on its way to the top, huh?
But Gautam sir, there's actually not much to celebrate.
Why not? An Indian is ruling the UK.
Indian leaders in third countries often tend to overcompensate for their minority handicap. For example, Sunak's Home Secretary of Indian origin, Suella Braverman, disapproved of India-UK free trade because it would encourage people immigrating to the UK, and the majority of whom were Indians. Structurally, India and UK have passed baggage, but still hasn't been resolved. And that is why...
Ladies and gentlemen, India needs to significantly temper its expectations from Rishi Sunak. Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective.
Mismanaged vaccination drive, broken healthcare systems, citizens taking matters into their own hands. India's failure in managing the COVID-19 crisis is staggering.
Want stories but without the West spin on it? Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective.